Listen to a very interesting presentation from our speakers on standards and where they fit within the K through 12 community. We have from the end over here Deborah Seahorn, who is with Computer Science Teachers Association. She's on the board of directors as well as a past chair. Mr. Jim Flanagan, the Chief Learning Services Officer with the International Society of Technology and Education. Dr. Roger Scotthammer, who is the director for Curriculum and Instruction, STEM Center for Teaching and Learning, and member of International Technology and Engineering Educators Association. That is a mouthful. And of course, Mr. Ben Scribner from DHS, who manages the National Initiation for Cybersecurity Education Workforce Framework. So thank you all.
That was nicely done.
I tell my students to make sure they're recording me in the lecture so that they can listen to it and understand it later. So anyway, and I think I mentioned my name is Margaret Leary. I'm with the National CyberWatch Center. I'm the Director of Curriculum. So what I would, well, the way we'll structure this is I'm going to let our panelists discuss the standards that are associated with their organization, and each one of them will have about 5 or 7 minutes to do that. And then we have some questions that we would like to them to address, and I'll throw that out to the panel. Maybe one or all of you would like to weigh in on some of this. And then we'll throw out some questions to the audience from whatever you have. So with that, I'm going to ask Deborah for you to give us some information to start us off.
Okay. I am, as you've heard, past chair of the Board of Directors of Computer Science Teachers Association, and recently retired after many years in education. I'll just leave it like that. More than anybody you heard about this morning. And I'm still working with CSTA, of course, on the board as past chair, but I was chair of the standards committee that created these in 2011. The CSTA K-12 Computer Science Standards, and you should have received one of those in your packet when you registered this morning. So we have more than 21,000 educators worldwide in computer science teachers, which I'll just call CSTA, a whole lot shorter. And they're not all K-12 educators. Sometimes they're people who support K-12 educators, like university and community college and industry, business and industry people. But we do promote the teaching of computer science in the grades K-12, and that's not necessarily teaching a computer science class, but it might be teaching computer science concepts and principles within the existing curriculum, particularly at the lower grades, K-8, although we do think that in middle school, I think the students are ready for courses that are rigorous and focused on computer science and other computing disciplines, and certainly in high school they should be. So we have many educators who have used our standards to align their curriculum to them, or to develop curriculum for their schools, or to plan computing curriculum for the K-12 system in which they work. So anyway, did I cover all the bases?
I think you did, yes. Thank you. Jim?
Great, thanks. So thanks for the opportunity to be here, Margaret. My name is Jim Flanagan. I'm the Chief Learning Services Officer at ISTE, International Society for Technology and Education. How many of you have heard of ISTE? And I've been in this role for all of 3 weeks now, so I don't have any business cards or anything. So, but by all means, if you want to reach me, that's my email address up there. I've been using the standards for a long time and been a long time fan. I think it was a Casey Kasem thing or something, but I was the former CIO of St. Louis Public Schools and have worked for various K-12 ed tech publishing and software companies out there. So again, the ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education, we have the ISTE standards. We've got a set of student standards that are currently being updated. I'll talk more about those. We've got standards for teachers that will be in the next cycle, and then standards for administrators and computer educators as well. But they all really focus and build off of those student standards. Our angle on this is really more from the pedagogical, how it's technology in education, so how can the technology support the education, not as much the technical component. There are others like at this panel, COSIN, and others that are addressing those. But the human part is very important. We also address those as part of our essential conditions, where we've got 14 critical elements, and we are addressing a need to address even more in areas of skilled personnel, ongoing professional learning, technical support, support policies, and support of external context. So that's a little bit about ISTE. We also, just stepping back, we've got our big national conference every year, so hopefully you've been able to attend that. We'll be able to attend again next June in Denver. We've got, this is an important part, over 100,000 stakeholders globally and affiliations and partnerships, both in states and then with other education ministries and organizations throughout the world. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
My name is Roger Schofield. I'm the Director for Curriculum and Instruction with the International Technology and Engineering Educators Association. A part of that organization is the STEM Center for Teaching and Learning. We have standards for technological literacy that have been around for about 15 years in some form or another. We're pretty happy with what they include, but we are taking that one step further. We're in the process of creating what we call integrative STEM focal points. So we're going to take the other content standards in STEM out there and our standards and kind of find where they match up and create what we're calling focal points for integrated STEM. So that's kind of the standards background of what I'm bringing to this. Our interest in cybersecurity and so forth is really about introducing students to a broad range of career opportunities, and this is one that we think is very important for them to be aware of.
Thank you, Roger. Ben?
I'm Benjamin Scribner with the Cybersecurity Education and Awareness Office at Homeland Security, which is distinct from Renee Fournier's office that you heard earlier in the keynote. She's in the CMSI office, and they are internally focused at Homeland Security, but we are focused externally on the nation and advancing the profession of cybersecurity. And Rick Garretts, before her, talked about how exciting a time this is to the students there. How many of you are actually the students, any students in this? I was wondering if we were going to get any students for something as dry as standards. So he talked about how exciting a time this is in cybersecurity. And it really is, from our perspective, because we are at the birth of a profession. I mean, this is a brand new profession that really is getting established from the ground up. And we are at Homeland Security are really working hard to try and accelerate the rate at which that profession gets established across our nation and for the betterment of our not just our federal government or even the state and local governments, but really for the private sector as well. And the reason we think that is that that's necessary is that we're in a desperate situation where we have nation states and organized crime and terrorist organizations leveraging this great technology we have to try and attack not just the big targets like Homeland Security and Department of Defense, but also even the smaller organizations, everybody who's connected to the internet. And the big thing that we're trying to do, the most foundational thing that we're trying to do under the auspices of the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education. And we're just one of the lead organizations in that initiative. But the big thrust for us and the thing that we think is underpinning all of the advances that we're going to have in professionalizing cybersecurity is something called the National Cybersecurity Workforce Framework, which is the standard around which we are going to organize our cybersecurity job market and this new profession in cybersecurity.
Okay, thank you. And so I think the answer to the question about how are you infusing cybersecurity into these standards has already been addressed, Roger, by of course you and of course Ben. But I'd like to throw that out to you, Deborah, and Jim, and how do you take these existing standards to update them or modify them so they now incorporate cybersecurity concepts?
Okay, we don't have any standalone cybersecurity standards in the K-12 computer science standards. We have foundations we have strands in our, including computational thinking, collaboration, computing practice. So the students are getting coding, they're getting ethics, they're getting safe practices in the world, they're getting a little bit about hardware, they're getting all those things through the standards that we've written, but nothing says, this is a cybersecurity standard. We are in the process, we will be meeting later this fall with educators from kindergarten through 12th grade and community college and university to look at the standards and see where we need to revise them. And we're taking input right now. We are soliciting input in a Google Doc from stakeholders. And if you're a member, how many members of CST out there? So you should have gotten an email that told you about that and directed you to a blog post, and there's a link. Click on that. So if you didn't, I will show you. It's in the Advocate blog on the CSTA website, and so you can click there. And I made the post, so you'll be able to find it. But we're soliciting input, and we're going to analyze that input and see. And we would love to have input on cybersecurity and what we need to do to beef it up. When I worked at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, we were looking at what do we need to do to put a cybersecurity pathway. We actually looked at Maryland's, and I talked with the person from the Maryland Department of Education today and what they were doing, and that's pretty much what we had looked at. But we decided that the students really needed to have more networking. They really need to know how networks work. They can't just have the coding part or the big computer science picture alone. They need to look at some networking stuff. So we were going to do that in North Carolina, but of course I've retired. And after a while, it's just time. But so we are going to. That's something we need to look at as we revise the standards this year. So not opposed to it at all, because I think in this day and time we need to have hooks to get students interested in coursework in high school that they're not required to take. So very few school systems require students to take a computer science class, a few, but not many. So it has to be interesting and engaging for them, and it has to be something that has real world relevance for them. So they have to want to do it. And so cybersecurity is one of those things. Game development is one of those things. App development is one of those things. You have to meet the students on their playing field and then infuse the skills that you want them to have into their learning program. But you have to have a hook to get them in.
Okay, thank you. Jim, how about you?
Yeah, right now, it starts again with our student standards, and within our digital citizenship framework is where we have been addressing it. But as those are getting a little dusty and old, and that's why we're at the refresh time, we really need to bolster those. I just came back from a 2-day session with a working group, a 17-member working group that are helping us to update those student standards. And also, while you're sending ideas to Deborah, please copy me too. So, and we'll be sharing ideas as well.
And vice versa.
Yeah, there's an old sarcastic joke of, the great thing about standards is there's so many to choose from, right? But, and so it really starts infusing it, I think, in that digital citizenship. One interesting thing that came out of the meeting was that sense of student self-direction, metacognition, and ownership. And that even puts more pressure on to really give them a sense of where they stand in this digital ecosystem, all the positives and potential threats. We did just do a paper. I've got a couple copies up here, and you can get it for free online too, on building and keeping a positive digital identity, really targeted at students and teachers as well. To start with there, and then again through our essential conditions, making sure that they're not meant to be real technical, but is making sure district administrators and others are addressing those components.
Okay, thank you. Ben, Roger, did you want to add anything to that, or okay.
So I would just say that, we are working on trying, in the same vein of trying to get the excitement in cybersecurity and generate that excitement. One of the things that we're trying to do is to engage the teachers from different high schools so that they can learn about the cybersecurity and to give them tools and resources that help them to incorporate cybersecurity into their curriculum. So it's a little bit different than setting a standard and requiring them to put it into their curriculum, but it's a preliminary step to do so.
And that actually is a good segue into my next question, which I'm going to combine a couple of questions that I had intended to ask. And that is, you know, as a couple of you have mentioned, we, you know, generally within academia, we have a plethora of standards incorporating all of the standards that we might like to incorporate can be very difficult. How have you attempted to maybe align some of your standards with other organizations' standards so that they're not competing standards? And what attempts have you made to perhaps recruit entities, schools, to adopt your standards? Deborah?
Okay, our standards are fairly young. We first developed them in 2011, so they're babies now, but they're time for a checkup. So that's what we're doing this year. But what we did then is we crosswalked our standards to several existing national standards because I came from the K-12 system myself. I wasn't a classroom teacher at the time, but I have been in the past, and I knew that teachers needed standards. So we crosswalked to the Common Core State standards for mathematical practice, and we put these crosswalks. They're available on our website on our standards webpage. And we crosswalked to the STEM cluster topics and the Century for 21st Century Skills partnership. I think I always mess that
Partnership
up.
for
Thank you.
21st Century Skills. We used to work with
Partnership
them also,
for
yeah.
21st Century Skills. And we've heard a lot about the things that are needed in cybersecurity, those soft skills, and many of them you'll find when you look at the P21, which is much easier way to say that, skills. So we have all those crosswalks available on our website, and that was one of the things we did. Well, of course, now the Common Core State standards have more or less fallen from grace in many places, and so, but the crosswalk is still there. They are still being used some places. They're kind of, it's a hodgepodge of the way people are using them. As far as getting people to adopt them, a lot of professional development out there. We do have an annual conference as well. Ours is in the summer, in July, generally after ISTE, usually, because some of the folks who go to ISTE also come to our conference, so we can't compete there. And we roll the standards out there. We'll roll the revision of the standards out at that conference, and have worked with teachers and other educators to use the standards so that they can develop coursework or align what they have already done to see where their gaps are. Even industry people have aligned some of their curriculum. I worked with SAS. They were like our beta testers when we first did our coursework. And I worked with the people at SAS, and they said, well, I thanked them for doing it. And they said, you know, this was instructive to us because we realized we weren't really focusing on the soft skills, and we needed to do that. And but this was very helpful for us. But all kinds of people have crosswalked. So it wasn't really a hard sell. We have local chapter leaders who have been given advocacy tools, and they've used the standards. They take it in and they show it to administrators and say, this is why I want to teach computer science. These are the standards I want to follow. And if you don't have time to read the book, you look at the nice colored charts in the back that have the scaffolding of the skills that students need to have from kindergarten all the way up through the 12th grade. And so they can see a pictorial vision of what they want to do. So those teachers have been very instrumental in getting these and working with legislators, because every state is different. I'm sure all of you have experienced this. So what a teacher needs in the way of licensure in the state of Maryland is not what a teacher in the neighboring state of Virginia needs, or in the state of Pennsylvania, or whatever. So each state is different. A lot of things going on in computer science, and I think all of us will be on that same bandwidth with all of it.
All right, thank you. Jim?
Yeah, we've tried to do a lot to crosswalk, and I think one really interesting thing since we last refreshed the student standards, the emergence of Common Core standards, or whatever your state calls your standards, or those standards, right? The interesting thing is so many of them are very close, but so some of this is packaging. I might talk about that a little bit, because standards has become a bit of a dirty word, like testing, and while we still believe in assessment, and we can't get pulled off track with that too much. And it's interesting you mentioned Partnership for 21st Century Skills, where I've done some work, and there's a lot of overlap between the 4 Cs and our student standards. So part of, as we've crosswalked, we've also had to step back and say, what's in the lexicon, what's moving along, and how can we use our standards to be more forward-looking and to push? So that's been a challenge that's come out of this. And when it comes to the crosswalk, and we're doing some human-centered design courses recently, and there's that sense of empathy, and really empathy with teachers, right? Teachers don't need that many more high-stakes tests or standards. So how can we fuse and present simpler rubrics, frameworks that are more coherent, allow folks to dig deeper, but allow entry for all stakeholders, students, teachers, and others. From an adoption standpoint, we've had standards for a long time. We've kind of done it all. I won't bother repeating everything from concert of our conference to working with state legislatures to departments of eds and district schools through our community. So we're checking all those boxes, but yeah, the key challenge I would say is figuring out how we can make our standards true, high quality, really updated and forward thinking, but then take that next step of packaging so they're more easily consumable and manageable.
Thank you.
I kind of touched on it in my introduction. So the Standards for Technological Literacy, the original document is about 15 years old. We revised them 2009. Wasn't a lot of change in those. And we have a curriculum that we call Engineering by Design that we have. It's a K-12 engineering, technology engineering curriculum. And those courses have always been based on standards for English language arts, mathematics, science, and so forth. But we do recognize that there is tons of standards for teachers, and that was part of our impetus for developing what we're calling those focal points, so that a single activity very clearly shows how it's addressing all of those things, where it's based specifically on those standards, as opposed to, hey, I've got this really good idea for a CO2 car, and then we tack on 15 standards that kind of aligns with. We're kind of turning that whole picture around and starting with all of those standards and finding out how we can create and develop focal points, making it easier for teachers, administrators, and so forth, but also developing curriculum that does a better job of putting all of those subjects into a context that's a little bit more real for students. So it takes it out of the vacuum of being just doing mathematics or just doing science, and it applies it in a way, in an engineering sense, that makes it relevant for the students.
So Ben, how would you see
I would just say more broadly that we started our development of the workforce framework by taking all of the preceding standards that we were aware of and using them as the foundation and basis for building our standards. So right there, what we were trying to do was to try and make sure that any standards that were related to building cybersecurity professionals, including any kind of education that might happen even at the K through 12 level, would be the basis for which we created this standard in the first place. So that it would from the get-go, it should be fairly, it should be able to relate to those standards. But then subsequently, of course, new standards have come out even after we created our standard, and we become aware of new ones all the time. And what we try and do is we try to create maps between them. So we're in the process of doing that, and that is a challenge too, because you have to do it in a way that is sound and goes through all of the rigor that's necessary to really make a good mapping between them. And we don't do it just all within our own office. We also partner with lots of other organizations. On the adoption front, we actually have been doing basically two things. We've been putting out tools that create incentives, and we've been creating tools that make it easier to adopt the framework. So, for instance, we have a toolkit on our portal, our NICS portal, or not a toolkit, but a training catalog on our NICS portal that is basically free advertising for any training or educational institution to advertise their courses. And
the only thing that they have to do in order to do that is to first map to our framework. Right? So they map their curriculum to our framework, and then they get free advertising for their courses on our website. And on the helping others to adopt side of things, we've developed tools like a workforce development toolkit that employers can use when they're building their positions, user guides for educational institutions and training providers so they can learn how to use the framework to map their curriculum. And one of the things that we're really excited about, again, we don't build everything ourselves. We also partner with lots of great other institutions. Department of Defense has been working on roles that are mapped to the framework, which makes it then that much easier to implement our standard or our nation's workforce standard, cybersecurity workforce standard, into positions, into the curriculum, and even into certifications.
Now I'm going to mix it up a little bit, and I'm going to start at this end for our final question before I throw this out to the audience to ask any questions that you all have. But what would you say would be the most challenging aspect to maybe standards adoption or any of the dissemination? So.
Well, I think that you ask an educator to include cybersecurity into their curriculum, and the first reaction that we've always gotten, even when we were in the Department of Defense, when I was in the Department of Defense, where you could order, you had much more control and command and control. The first reaction was always, well, what do you want me to take back out of the curriculum? Where am I going to fit this? So I would say that, we especially with standards, there are just, as we've said before, there are just so many different standards that educators have to operate within, that when you ask them to add something new, no matter how compelling and important it may sound, it is a big challenge for you to communicate to them also how they're going to fit it into their curriculum. Again, I would point at this program that we have right now, which actually brings the teachers and their students from high schools into participating camps and teaches them about ways to include cybersecurity or use cybersecurity examples and topics in their existing curriculum, so that they're not really trying to take something out, they're just including it as part of what they're already teaching. And so that one's been pretty successful.
Is there funding available for that to support, for instance, educators that would be interested in that?
So I'm actually not the one who runs that program. There's Dan Stein, who's in the same office that I'm in. So I don't know what the funding situation is with that, but I do know that what we co-fund is these camps that are run, and then the students and the teachers go to those camps. And I don't know whether there's additional funding for additional schools or if it's only the schools that have it right now. But if you contact me, I'd be happy to put you in touch with Dan Stein, and he can answer all those questions.
All right, thank you. Roger?
It's interesting that you talk about what are we going to take away, and that's whenever I'm doing professional development around technology and engineering, that's the first bit of thing I hear is what are we going to take away, and that's part of I think the movement within an integrated STEM curriculum is to find ways to include technology, include engineering education, and include the other things that are important, not just the science, the mathematics, English language arts, but those soft skills that we've been talking about are so important. Put them into a context. So that's really what is the driving force behind that, is to kind of bring those standards in, get that content out there where the students need it, to do it in a way that is also supporting other standards, so that the dissemination and adoption becomes easier. For us initially, I know our standards for technological literacy were for technology education teachers, and that was pretty well accepted. I mean, we still have obviously teachers who are teaching WITS, but we've also got teachers who are teaching advanced robotics. We kind of got the whole spectrum going on, but they've been fairly well accepted. It's getting it into the elementary schools, getting it to work beyond just the elective courses that we're after.
It's human behavior, the most challenging thing. Here where teachers are confronted with and both have the opportunity to redesign teaching and learning, and we're just trying to get them on board with that, and that's a challenge. And then also you throw in a little bit of fear, and that doesn't work well when you're just trying to change, right? It gives a lot of people an excuse to stop. On the way over, I was talking to a current CIO friend in the school district of Massachusetts about this and the human behavior piece, and he said recently they had to collect all the teacher laptops back for re-imaging, and 70% of them had Post-it notes on them with passwords. So part of what he did from that was counterintuitive. They used to require password updates 4 times a year. He went back to 1 time a year because net he thought it would at least. So, but it's getting the teachers, the adults, to exhibit the behaviors we want the students to model, and so much more. But that's one that I would put out there.
Deborah?
Well, all of the above, and then there's really a lot of confusion and misconception out there about what exactly is computer science. Is it using Microsoft Office? Is it just safe operation of the computer? What exactly is computer science? So that's one thing, and then fitting it in the school day. Our K-6 standards are designed so that they could be taught within existing curriculum, but then, when the students become more advanced as their skills progress, those really need to be standalone courses. And so finding that space in the curriculum, they don't want math teachers to do it because in most states now, students take at least 3 math classes to graduate. And we're not just talking math, we're talking algebra, whatever, integrated math, whatever they call it. But there are 4 math courses in North Carolina where I was working and 3 science classes. So pretty much math and science teachers were out, except in local school systems where the students were above average and whatever. And so then they could see computer science. But people don't understand what computer science is. The licensure and certification is all over the place. And so even if they have the standards, they look at it and go, well, who would teach this? And what would that person have? And then the professional development of the teachers, you're asking them. There was a post on Facebook yesterday, some of you may have seen it, why we still use Texas Instrument calculators when we could use an app on the phone, and all kids have phones. It's because the teachers are comfortable. And we had an issue like that. Teachers didn't want to update to the newest version of the software. I'm like, why? There are no problems with it. It would be different. And anyway.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that because even at a college level, I find that there's a lot of confusion among college faculty between what is IT versus what is computer science. And so sometimes.
Are they related? And how are they related?
Right.
And what is cybersecurity?
Yes.
As
Where does
opposed
that
to either
fit?
one of those
Yes.
2 things, right? So,
And-
and that's what we're
Where's
here to
the
help
both?
with what is cybersecurity.
All right, well, thank you, and I'd like to open it up now for some questions from you all about maybe how this impacts you at your institutions.
I have a question.
Sure.
I mean,
No,
have you,
she's the moderator. But you're looking right at me.
have you seen anything about this new praxis for computer science when we're asking the question, what is computer science?
So I have to sort of plead a little ignorance on this. I knew that there were states who are piloting a praxis for computer science. Texas and Arkansas are the 2 I knew about. I knew that Wisconsin was interested in a praxis. They've done a lot of work on teacher licensure, worked with universities. And then I heard in the morning workshop that I was in today, I heard that, oh yes, there is one that came out like 4 weeks ago. And I was like, oh, I missed that memo. So apparently, apparently Praxis, ETS has come out with a Praxis. Yeah, really. So write that down. So they have piloted it in other states. So apparently they feel, I don't know, I have no idea what's on it. So,
I've
but
looked at
yes.
some of the sample questions, and by the time they rolled it out, we're talking about needing to know, like, operating systems that are long dead. I mean, it's really obscure. And if we're so strapped for computer science teachers and we're still asking the question, what is computer science? And states make a decision about who can teach computer science based on a test that is flawed, that we're being cut off at the knees. And I'm really worried that this test is gonna be
So that worries me a
set
bit
us
too.
back. And I think that we need to be really
You know,
cognizant of
like
other
probably
forces
only
at
people
work.
of my age even know what DOS is, let alone probably some of you do, but I should hope that's not a question on that test. But that is one of the challenges that we all face, is that the curriculum changes with the speed of light, and the needs of the students change. I mean, it's changing every day. There's something different, so.
That's absolutely true. The technology is very rapidly evolving, and the attack vectors are changing it only in as much as that there are new ways that they figure out how to get into our networks all the time. But actually, the fundamentals of cybersecurity and the basic root ways that they are using the technology oftentimes is pretty much the same attack vectors over and over again.
Right.
If you really go down to they're very root.
And one would hope that in a practice they would ask basic questions and not specific operating system questions or any kind of specific software questions. But I have not seen it. I have not seen any of the indicators on the exam, but it's on my list to do.
Thank you. We need to
Thank you.
look at it quickly.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so as a curriculum writer, project lead, the way I've used the CSTA standards and the ISTE standards and STL, the NICE framework, I'm interested looking forward. So we've written K-8 curriculum, we've rolled out with 2 years of computer science at the high school level. We're very interested in developing a cybersecurity course for high schools, and I want to make a distinction between what I want to call cyber hygiene and cybersecurity, standards that address having students be hygienic versus standards that address having students understanding the fundamental concepts that cybersecurity workers need to understand. And when you get really down to standards and what they mean for teachers, it has a lot to do with the assessments. So I'm interested to hear, Ben, this is really directed at you. As you think about the NICE framework for K-12, what assessments do you see as being relevant?
Well,
for the cybersecurity piece rather than the cyber hygiene?
Yeah, and so this is also getting at, one of the challenges that we face, which is that cybersecurity, whose job is cybersecurity, and when you really look at the attacks that we've seen up until this point, you realize that the cybersecurity is almost everybody's responsibility. It may not be your job, and you may not get paid to do cybersecurity per se. It may only be 2, 3, 4% of your job is to do something to make sure that you have secured your aspect of cybersecurity. We can look back at Target as an example. The way they got into the target networks was not by attacking directly the target networks. They may have had the top best cybersecurity professionals on the job protecting their networks, but an acquisition professional chose to make, who is not in our traditional cybersecurity workforce, made a choice in who we were going to work with without vetting that person, and whatever process they had for partnering with people did not include making sure that the organizations that they partnered with also had good cybersecurity hygiene and protected their own software. And so this means that we have to think of cybersecurity as an incredibly broad field of work and study and incorporate it into everything. When it comes to K through 12, without having thought of, specifically about what tests it should go into, I haven't done that kind of look into this yet. Neither has my office. To my knowledge, the people at Homeland Security haven't come up with a plan for specifically addressing that. But I would say that cybersecurity on the hygiene and awareness side is oftentimes the jumping off point for an interest in the I want to do this and get paid to do it process. So it probably is part of the way to get people involved and interested in a career. That's where I would start.
Okay, any other questions from our audience?
Morgan, I'm curious about, just to go along with that, as we look at the Internet of Everything, where literally you name a career, and whether you want to call it cyber hygiene or you get into cybersecurity is associated with it. You look at your house right now, you've got probably a security company that's there. If you have a network television or Blu-ray player, or you've got your appliances are hooked up to it, how do you see the standards then, or if anyone to talk a little bit more about that? While we have perhaps a profession that might be over here, it really, since it's risk management, it flows across every profession. How do you see the standards over time then being applied across literally every job that's out there as we move more and more toward this? Again, whether you're looking at now, if you're an automobile technician, you're dealing with the network, and it's Bluetooth or Wi-Fi back into the broader network, and it just goes on and on and on. Toys, everything. How do we see that as we move forward in terms of standards?
Well, take a quick cut at that. Part of the ISTE standards to keep them from getting so unwieldy is, there's standards that high school students need that aren't subject specific or aren't career specific. Now with that, you've got to stay more general, right? We get criticized for that, but we'd rather allow experts in certain areas and point to those experts to, get more detailed. But part of our challenge now is to bring those universal capabilities, understandings up to that level. I don't have the answer for you though, but I'm sure you've got some ideas and the rest of you. But it's a key challenge. You were talking about, kind of physical objects, or, you think about it, milk. Milk's going to have some tag on it, or it is everything.
Right.
I would say that it's kind of three prongs. You have awareness, general user awareness. You have, okay, you just got hired into this job, which is not a cybersecurity job, but it has some aspect of cyber, and we need to train you on that. And then you have okay, your job is cybersecurity, and you are a cybersecurity professional. So that you've got those three flavors, and large organizations like Homeland Security, we're going to build our own cybersecurity workforce. We're going to use the workforce framework. We're going to build our own cybersecurity teams, and we're going to sculpt them to defend our networks against the things that are the people who are attacking our networks. Your mom and pop's shop, unfortunately, are also subject to cyber attack. I mean, organized crime is going after small organizations. There's an escrow company in Florida that went out of business because all of their funds were transferred to China and Russia, and all of a sudden they didn't have the funds to do business. They weren't an online gambling company. They weren't an online gaming company. They were an escrow company that didn't really even do their business online. It's just because their bank had an online presence that money was transferred out. Organizations like that are not going to build their own cyber team. It's just not going to happen. So I think that probably through an evolution in the marketplace, through maybe related to insurance, maybe there will be drivers for organizations like that to buy into a cybersecurity support network that will provide that kind of cybersecurity. And that's me trying to peer into a crystal ball of where this may or may not go. That's not necessarily what we have today, and I'm trying to read the tea leaves to say that may be the way it would go.
Thank you. And I think, we'll have this last question.
I have a question/comment. So I'm Stephanie Keegan with the Department of Defense, CIO. And we have a lot of challenges across the board. We, the federal government, the United States, the globe, has a lot of challenges across the board. What we're seeing inside the Department of Defense is that security's that other guy's job. And they still refer to it as a bolt-on activity, where integration into K through 12 and standards of learning and understanding that every decision made affects it. Whether you consider it hygiene, that affects the cybersecurity. Whether you consider cybersecurity as professional, whether it's just you using something and using it appropriately. We've got to be able to thread through, leverage existing standards, but really educate that every decision made, everything within computer science as a whole, every decision made in the design process, in the programming processes, in the understanding of everything, has a decision that's made and the responsibility to be able to say, I've done this, I've gone through this process, I've developed and designed this in a secure manner. It's no longer, we can no longer afford to do this bolt-on, somebody else is gonna look at it and tell me it's okay. They can do a compliance check, really, you're not gonna have somebody who's gonna be that intimately involved in every line of code. And review every line of code to know what the Easter eggs are and all the different holes are and the back doors are. So the question and more of the
the challenge I give to you as you go out and develop standards is figure out ways to identify those standards that you currently have that are directly related to or have direct impact on cybersecurity writ large, the entire gamut, and really help to formulate and educate our students today that it's ingrained in there, and they have got to understand that they're responsible as well for their jobs that they take, but they have to learn it somewhere, and we need to do a better job there. So I know that you've talked about being able to do this and be able to add these different things. A lot of it is already there. Being able to understand, when I go and talk to system administrators, and I know this from an IT perspective, system administrators on a job, what do you do for cybersecurity? Well, cybersecurity is a guy's behind the job behind the door. I said, do you do configuration management? Yes. Do you do software updates? Yes. Do you do patches? Yes. Do you manage database access and controls? Yes. How do you log into a system? Well, this is what I have to do with my password and with my card and yada, yada, yada. Everything you said there is directly related to cybersecurity. If not being a cybersecurity effort, it's directly related to cybersecurity. It has a direct impact whether or not we get hacked. So you've got to be able to, earlier on in the process, understand every nuance of what's going on. So it just...
Their definition of cybersecurity is so narrow within their own mind.
Right.
Correct. It's that bolt-on module, and most of the curriculum I've seen today is a bolt-on class versus being threaded through a lot of different curriculum across the board. We were having a conversation today at lunch. Do you have Wi-Fi at school? What do you do as far as how you get on that Wi-Fi? How are you educating people with that? You know, when you log on, what do you have to do? Small things, small presence, and being able to thread those scenarios through math classes, through programming classes.
I'm just building off of your continuum there. You can take it forward to any person. I'll pick students, you know. Are you doing an activity that's actively or passively digital?
Right.
And having them go through those scenarios. Like case in point, if you're on a street corner, is there a camera capturing your image? You're doing a passively digital.
Very similar conversation we had at lunch.
And just allow them to realize, and most, they're probably more savvy about some of that, but really realize the full aspect of that, and then work downstream in the more technical aspects.
Margaret, could I force one more in, please?
Yes.
This leads to, we do a lot of work with the Department of Labor, OSHA, looking at safety as being a life skill, not just a profession by itself, but if you think about from the time if you're a parent, it's always, don't do that, baby, don't touch that, that's going to burn you, put the snake down, no, don't pull the dog's tail, this kind of thing. Two parts of this. Do you see a point then where we have established a national set of standards and guidelines and policies for safety for companies and organizations to operate on, that the same thing would happen for cyber? And do we start to look at, because it's a risk management really, you know, for any organization to start to look at cyber then being a life skill, whether you want to call it the hygiene side of it or not, and there has to be a set of standards that goes along with that for acceptable practices.
Should be.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and in conclusion, I think that's an excellent point, and of course, I think that would be the charter for the group, to infuse then all of these different standards with cybersecurity. And so with that, thank you very much. The hand for...
Thank you, Margaret. It was wonderful.
Thank you.